It was the middle of the day. I don't know why, but if it were earlier or later, it would feel less exposed. If it were darker, colder, anything that's considered in any way negative, it would have felt more natural to me. But it was not. It was the middle of the day, and the fact that it was bright and sunny, that it was neither too hot nor too cold, that the inside of the building was brightly lit, and that it wasn't isolated, that it was, in fact, filled with people who were there for what could only be described by most people as a wholesome reason, made me feel anxious to no end. The fact of the matter is, most people in that cult did truly believe in something special, in some sense of community that they thought they would be provided, and the weekly gathering, something akin to a church gathering, was the highlight of their lives all throughout their years living there. And that gathering of people, for whatever reason, was and is intensely terrifying to me. Maybe because there always seemed to be just one person there that didn't belong. Me. Alex put down the book next to him on the nightstand. He didn't feel comfortable climbing up to the sanctity of the top bunk on that night. Did not feel like it would be right. He knew he would no longer feel safe there, not after that horrid nightmare of being exposed and nude in the crowd of people who had all been there for reasons he had come to despise. He did not want to sleep there if he felt unsafe, believing that once he did so, he would never be the same again. He lay awake, unwilling to return to sleep, but in the end his body betrayed him, and he awoke hours later to a knocking on the door. Answering it, he saw Adrian, the man whose bedroom he fled from in the middle of the night after the nightmare. He wanted to be alone, needed to be alone, but seeing him now made his heart race and his knees weak. "Why did you run away from me?" he asked, angrily, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. I just needed to be alone for a while." "Are you feeling better now?" Andrew demanded, angrily. Alex nodded. "Good," he breathed out, and pulled up his sleeves. Before he started, Alex melted into the wall and felt genuinely in love, for the first time since Krista. "Why do you do these things?" Gary asked him while they were working next to each other out in the field. "I have my reasons," Alex told him. The session from that morning had left him with a black eye. The only person on the farm who didn't know why was Miss Kathy, who assumed that it was some sort of fight between the boys. But Alex was beaming, his face alight with joy even as he was working. "We're about to head to college. You can't be doing things like this over there," Gary told him. He sighed, and his smile faded a little. "Gary, I tried to tell you on that day why I did what I did. Do you remember what I told you?" "Not really. I was just so shocked. You said something about the father, and the rest is a blur. I wasn't able to talk much that day, and then I didn't understand it entirely myself. All I knew, and all I told you, was that the father no longer would, and that after he had stopped, I realized that I no longer knew how to live without it," he said seriously. "But why?" Gary insisted, stopping his work momentarily for the sake of the conversation. "Gary," there was another one of those deep sighs. "I'll tell you, but I need a reason to. I haven't told anyone else why, not even Krista knows. Not that it's a secret, just that no one else has ever asked. Why is this so important to you? If you can tell me that, I'll tell you this." Gary looked nervous. He fiddled with his equipment awkwardly, stood around for a few moments before finally getting up the courage to say it. "I love you, Alex. I have for some time now. And I know that you're not going to settle down in a relationship, but I have to know why you do these things. Why someone I care about so much feels the need to hurt themselves, to have others hurt them. Why, Alex?" He was on the verge of tears now. Alex walked a short distance to his friend, put his arms around him, and whispered in his ear, "Because I cannot feel love without it. Somewhere along the lines through the years, I had begun to believe that what the father did was love, and the lines between love and violence became blurred and then vanished. Then they melted together in one color. And then I was finally able to have what I have now, the incessant, never-ending lovemaking that I had, without realizing, been yearning for all through these years. It made me nauseous to suppress. And that's the thing I never had until just 2 days before you found me. Michael and Krista showed me. They showed me everything that I knew I would need for the rest of my life from that moment forward. Gary was stunned, unable to speak, unable to offer a counter-argument. How could he hurt the man he loved so much and so dearly? But then, how could he deny him the love and affection they craved and needed? His knees buckled beneath him, and he was on the dirt, crying, hands at his face, and Alex had his arms around him again. Or, still, he wasn't sure which. He just knew that this sort of comfort, this kind of physical sign of caring, was something that Alex could not feel without violence, and all he could do now was weep in the face of such a broken mind and psyche. During their break, they went off to a more secluded place than where the boys usually had their lunch, and him and Gary continued to talk while they ate. "You could be envy," Alex offered, seemingly out of nowhere. "What are you talking about?" It was Krista's idea. According to her, a bunch of the teenagers in the arcade are doing it. You take or create a group of friends, and based on the personality and lifestyle of each of them, you assign them one of the 7 deadly sins. Gary mused, taking a huge bite of food in half anger. "It's pretty fun. Though I don't have enough people yet. I could be lust, you could be envy. Andrew is wrath, and the resident bookkeeper is sloth." "How so?" "Are you kidding me? He stays in his pajamas all day. He does his bookkeeping, does some random stock trading for less than an hour a day, then goes back to sleep. That guy is the embodiment of sloth, doing as little as he can, all the days of his life." "How did you two end up being friends? It sounds like he's too lazy to jump you," Gary said, irritated now. "See, you're already getting into the envy persona," Alex teased, leaning in closer to Gary in order to make him feel uncomfortable. After lunch, they went back to work, and the boys didn't talk much beyond that point. Everything that could have been said had been said, and both boys knew the situation and that further talking would change nothing. Alex enjoyed teasing Gary, and Gary knew that he would continue doing it, and now he was the one sighing. There seemed to be nothing he could do. That night, Alex went to sleep in the top bunk alone. It had been a while since he had seen Krista. Work kept her very busy now, but she made a promise to still visit as often as she could. He knew that she wouldn't just forget him. He fell asleep smiling and thinking about Krista, saw her in his mind standing over him with her heels and a pair of cuffs ready for him. She really was his perfect woman. His dreams were not pleasant. In them, Krista was replaced by the father, his figure intimidating and large. Alex felt like a child again, wanted to run, turned to the door behind him and found it locked. The silent, angry man walked towards him, seemed to be growing larger and heavier as Alex felt himself shrinking, unable to run or hide anywhere. He tried to scream, felt that he had no voice, could not reach out to anyone. Suddenly he knew he was dreaming and could not wake up. Not before what always happened in the father's study had taken place. All the while he cried and wished for Michael to come save him. When he woke up, he ignored the journal next to his bed. His hands were shaking too much, and ran out of his dark, suddenly cold room towards Andrew. He needed someone who cared about him, someone who could do what the father would, but lovingly, caringly, someone he had feelings for, who could reciprocate them. On his way there, he found Gary. "Gary, what are you doing up so late? I could ask you the same thing. Couldn't sleep?" He trailed off. Krista told me you have nightmares sometimes, he said. Alex looked down. He felt better not being alone, but still needed to go to Andrew desperately. I hope we can get some sleep. I'll talk to you tomorrow, he said, rushing in the direction of the older man's room. Whoa, where are you going? Your room's that way, Gary told him, gently taking hold of his arm. Who says I'm going to my own room again? He said, now frustrated with Gary wanting to treat him like a Puritan. Will you stop judging me? I just need to get through the night. You already have that black eye. Who knows what'll get to you next? You're so worried that I'll go too far, then why don't I go to your room instead? Gary's heart stopped. You would do that? He barely managed to utter. Sure, if you can do what I want you to, Alex said, stepping closer to him again. Alex, you know that I can't do that, he insisted, trying to keep his eyes fixed on anything but the boy. Oh, that's too bad, Alex teased, touching Gary's chest for a second, leaning in close enough for a kiss, then turning away before leaving to Andrew's room. The next morning, Gary and Alex both had the day off. After a long and sleepless night, Alex went back to his own room to get his things ready for a bath. The water burned his new wounds, and it felt amazing. He felt the warmth finally return to him. He hated the cold, had lived his whole life in it, and hated it. He never wanted to feel cold again. When he got out, Gary was waiting outside of his room. Hi, he said sheepishly. Hello, Alex replied coldly. He opened the door and went in to get dressed. He expected Gary to follow him, but he just waited outside until Alex was done. When he came out again, Gary looked at him with sadness in his eyes. I know that I can't make you happy the way that Andrew has, but can we still be friends? He asked, looking down. Why? Alex demanded to know. Because I don't know how to live my life without you in it anymore, he admitted. The words struck a chord with Alex. He smiled, took Gary's arm in his, and said, Let's go visit Sloth. He's the best guy to hang out with on your days off. They spent the day playing video games, eating random snacks, and goofing off. They talked about their plans for college and what they'd do when they came back, asked Sloth how his job worked and whether he had any real qualifications. Neither ever found out his real name, and he never offered it. Just gave his sleepy explanation of how he got to where he was, despite suffering from what he referred to as narcolepsy. Alex lost track of time, lost track of everything, and the next thing he knew, he was dreaming again. There have been very few nights now where he slept in his own room. It was only there for when he wanted to be alone, which, most nights, he did not. He slept at Krista's place a few times, around random places and the various boys on the farm, depending on who flirted with him that day. The place he'd returned to the most often was Andrew's room, a dark, green room that felt like a basement, but was really up in the attic. He had fallen asleep a few times at a party even, though he had never taken to drinking. He simply was not interested. In his dream that night, he was back in the gathering hall. In spite of the father always insisting that there was no God, they had each gone through something similar to a baptism, a sort of test of faith. Alex recalled the man grabbing him by the neck as he swashed around, unable to breathe, afraid to swallow the water, needing to come up for air. Now, it was happening again, only this time the crowd of people felt even more distant than they had been on the day of his 10th birthday. That seamlessly blended into the background as the man pushed him further and further into the water. And his body betrayed him, and he gasped for air and breathed in the water instead. He felt cold, cold, cold. And he knew that he was dreaming and could not wake, and tried to force himself to open his eyes, to move his body, anything to jolt him out of sleep. After what felt like an eternity breathing in water and choking on the cold, he opened his eyes, blurry with tears, unable to focus. He panicked, not knowing where he was, not wanting to be alone. And then he noticed it, a hand in his, a warm, small hand that was firmly holding his own. He breathed heavily, started to calm down. He still didn't know where he was, or whose room he had fallen asleep that night. But it was alright. Wherever he was, if Krista was with him, he felt safe. Thank you for listening and watching. All links and references are in the description below.